"You came all this way," Nathan Cole said, his voice cutting through the crowd like a blade, "but I won't marry you." Amelia Carter stood frozen in the middle of Silver Creek's Main Street, her worn traveling bag still in her hand, dust from the stagecoach still on her coat. Every single soul in that town staring at her face as the words hit her like a slap she never saw coming. Before we go any further, if stories about love, survival, and the kind of courage that changes everything speak to your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The stagecoach had pulled into Silver Creek at 2:30 in the afternoon, and the whole town had come out to see. That was the thing about small towns in Montana Territory in 1884. There wasn't much that qualified as an event, and a mail-order bride arriving to marry the most solitary man in the county was about as close to theater as Silver Creek was going to get on a Thursday. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways. Women in aprons paused their sweeping. Old men who hadn't moved quickly in years found themselves suddenly at the edge of the wooden sidewalk, craning their necks toward the road that led in from the eastern pass. Nathan Cole stood apart from all of them. He always stood apart. He was a tall man, weathered in the way that Montana weather a person not broken, but worn smooth, the way river rock gets worn smooth, all the softness long since carried off by current and cold. His jaw was tight, his hat was pulled low. He had positioned himself near the post office, which was far enough from the crowd to suggest he wasn't part of the spectacle, but close enough that everyone knew why he was there. He was there because he had written a letter. 6 weeks ago, in a moment of practical desperation, Nathan Cole had sat down at the table in Smithton, the same table where he had eaten every meal alone for the past 4 years, and he had put pen to paper and written to the Hargrove Marriage Agency out of Chicago. He had not written a romantic letter. He had written something closer to a business proposal. He needed someone capable of managing a household. Someone who understood that ranch life was demanding and often thankless. Someone without illusions about what life on the Western Range actually looked like. He had not mentioned loneliness. He had not mentioned grief. He had not mentioned the way the silence in that house had grown so thick over the years that some mornings it felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest before he even got out of bed. He had kept it practical because practical was the only language he trusted anymore. The agency had written back. They had a woman. Her name was Amelia Carter, 28 years old, from Kansas City, Missouri. Capable, hardworking, experienced with farm life, willing to relocate. The letter from the agency had described her in the same businesslike terms Nathan had used when making his request, which he had taken as a good sign. No poetry, no promises, just facts. He had written back and said yes. And now the stagecoach door was opening. Nathan watched from under the brim of his hat. A hand appeared first. No glove, he noticed, just bare fingers gripping the doorframe, and then a woman stepped down onto the dusty street. She moved carefully, but without hesitation, the way a person moves when they're paying attention to their own body and trusting it. She was wearing a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days. Her hair was pinned up but loose in places, strands escaping around her temples from what must have been a very long and very rough road. She was carrying a single bag, one bag. Nathan had expected luggage. Most women who came west came with trunks, came with entire histories packed into boxes and cases. This woman had one bag, and she held it against her side, like it was something she had learned to carry so often that it had simply become part of her silhouette. She stepped away from the coach and looked at the town. Not searching, not nervous, just looking, the way a person takes stock of a situation before deciding what to do about it. And then someone in the crowd Nathan would never know who said, just loudly enough, "Well, she's younger than I thought." The murmur moved through the gathered townspeople like a wave, low and not entirely kind, the particular sound a crowd makes when it is deciding whether to be welcoming or whether to be entertained. Nathan had lived in Silver Creek long enough to know which direction that sound usually went. He pushed off from the post office wall. He crossed the street. He was aware of every eye in town following him, and he hated that awareness. hated the way the whole crowd of people could make a private moment into something that belonged to everyone. But he walked because there was nothing else to do. He had written a letter. The woman had answered it. She had come all this way. The least he could do was cross the street. Amelia Carter saw him coming. She turned to face him fully, and for just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, he saw something cross her face that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite fear. It was something more complicated than either. The look of a person who has been traveling toward a thing for a very long time, and has just arrived, and doesn't quite know yet whether they are glad they came. Nathan stopped in front of her. He was aware of the silence that had fallen over the crowd. He took off his hat. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was steady. Clear. She didn't fidget. He looked at her. She looked at him. And Nathan Cole, who prided himself on being a man who always knew what to say in difficult situations, who had talked down panicked horses and negotiated with ornery cattle buyers, and once talked a man out of drawing a gun in this very street, Nathan Cole could not find the words he needed. Because the words he needed were not the words a man was supposed to say to a woman who had just gotten off a stagecoach after traveling hundreds of miles to marry him. But they were the only honest words he had. "Miss Carter," he said again, "I need to tell you something before we go any further." She didn't move. "All right. I wrote to that agency in good faith," he said. "I meant everything I put in the letter. I need someone at the ranch. I need help managing the operation, the house, the accounts." "That part is true. Yes," she said carefully. "That's what the agency told me." But Nathan paused. He was very aware of how many people were listening. He lowered his voice, though it made no difference. Sound carried in Silver Creek, especially when people were straining to hear. "But I think there may have been a misunderstanding about the nature of what I was offering." Amelia's expression didn't change. She was watching him with those steady, dark eyes, and he couldn't tell what was happening behind them, which unnerved him more than he expected. "What kind of misunderstanding?" she asked. "I'm not ready to marry," Nathan said. "I thought I was. When I wrote the letter, I thought I was ready. But standing here right now," he stopped, pressed his lips together. "Tried again. I don't think I can give you what a wife deserves to receive. And I won't start something I can't finish fair." The silence in the street was now so complete that Nathan could hear the wind moving dust across the ground near his boots. Amelia Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the crowd. She seemed to take a slow, quiet inventory of every face watching her, the pity on some, the curiosity on others, the barely concealed satisfaction on a few that he recognized and liked least. She looked at the post office, at the hotel across the street, at the mountains in the distance, purple and enormous, and indifferent. And then she looked back at Nathan. "I see," she said. Those two words, and the particular way she said them, without heat, without collapse, without the tears he half expected and honestly dreaded, told Nathan something he hadn't anticipated. This woman was not going to make a scene. She was not going to weep in the street, or demand explanation, or give the crowd the satisfaction of a spectacle. Which made him feel worse, not better. "There's a hotel," he said, because he had to say something. "The Garnet House, just up the street. I'll arrange for a room. I'll pay for the coach back east whenever you're ready, mine too." "I didn't come all this way to go back east," Amelia said. The words were quiet, but they landed like stones. Nathan stared at her. "I beg your pardon. I said I didn't come all this way to go back east." She shifted her bag from one hand to the other, a small, deliberate movement. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate your honesty. I understand that this isn't what either of us expected. But I'm not getting back on that stagecoach. Miss Carter, I left Kansas City with $40 to my name and one bag of belongings," she said, still quiet, still steady, but there was something underneath the steadiness now, something that Nathan could hear more than identify, a kind of bedrock resolve. The sound of a person who has made a decision and made peace with the cost of it. "I am not going back. I'll find work here in town if I need to. I'll find somewhere to stay, but I will not go back." From somewhere in the crowd, someone exhaled. Whether it was admiration or disbelief, Nathan couldn't tell. He put his hat back on. He looked at the woman standing in front of him, this stranger, who had come hundreds of miles on the strength of a letter, and was now standing in the dust of his town, refusing to be sent away. And he thought something he hadn't expected to think. "What? She means it. The hotel," he said finally. "Tonight. We can talk in the morning." "Fine," said Amelia Carter. And she picked up her bag and walked toward the Garnet house without looking back. The crowd parted for her. Nathan stood in the street and watched her go, hat in his hand, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like he was the one who had been caught off guard. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay on the narrow cot in the back room of his ranch house. He had never been able to bring himself to sleep in the main bedroom. Not since Clara. And he hadn't tried in 4 years, and he stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman in a dark blue dress who had looked at an entire town's worth of pity and chosen not to flinch. He had done the wrong thing. He knew that. No, he had done the honest thing, and honest things were sometimes wrong in their execution, even when they were right in their intention. He had been honest with Amelia Carter. He had told her the truth. He had not made her a promise he couldn't keep, but he had told her in the street, in front of the whole town, that had been cowardly. He saw that now. He had wanted the crowd there. Some part of him had wanted witnesses, because witnesses meant he couldn't take it back, and if he couldn't take it back then, the decision was made, and he didn't have to keep making it over and over in his own head. He was a coward, with a good excuse, which was the worst kind of coward. Nathan sat up on the edge of the cot and ran both hands through his hair. The ranch was quiet around him. It was always quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel like peace, and had gradually, over 4 years, come to feel like something else entirely. Like the absence of something. Like a room with all the furniture taken out, where you keep reaching for things that aren't there anymore. And being surprised, every time, that your hand finds only air. He thought about writing to the agency, apologizing, asking if there was any way to know. He stopped that thought before it went anywhere. He had made a decision. He had made it for good reasons. Clara had been dead 4 years, and the pain of losing her had not diminished the way people promised it would. And every time Nathan Cole let himself imagine something different, imagine a future, imagine another person in this house, that pain sharpened into something that felt like self-preservation. Like the body refusing to walk toward a thing that had destroyed it once already. He was protecting himself. He was protecting her. He was protecting everyone from the kind of husband he would make right now, which was a poor excuse for one. He got dressed before sunrise and went out to check on the cattle, because that was what he did when he couldn't sleep. There was always work to do. There was always some part of the ranch that needed attention. Work had saved him more times than he could count, and he trusted it the way. He trusted almost nothing else, because work was simple. Work was clear. You did it, and either it was done or it wasn't, and either way you knew where you stood. He was mending the fence along the south pasture when he heard a horse coming up the road. He didn't look up immediately. The road that ran past the Cole Ranch ran past 3 other properties as well, and there was nothing unusual about early morning riders. But something made him pause in his work, something in the rhythm of the hoofbeats, or maybe just some instinct that had kept him alive through enough hard winters to be trusted, and when he did look up, he saw that it wasn't a rider at all. It was a woman on foot, leading a rented horse, walking the road toward his gate. She was wearing the same dark blue dress. Her hair was pinned up more carefully this time. She was carrying her bag in one hand and the horse's lead in the other. And she walked the way she had walked across the street in Silver Creek, with that particular combination of attention and forward intention that he was beginning to think might just be how she moved through the world. Nathan straightened up. He set down the wire he'd been working with. He waited. Amelia Carter opened his gate, led the horse through, closed the gate behind her properly, latching it twice the way you learned to do in real ranch country, and walked toward him. "I don't know what I'm looking for," she said before he could speak. "I want to be honest about that. I came out west because I needed a future, and the one I had back home was gone. That's the truth. The agency made it sound like a match that would work for both of us, and I believed them, and maybe I was foolish for that. I don't know." Nathan said nothing, partly because he didn't know what to say. partly because she wasn't done. But I'm not foolish about work, she continued. I know how to manage a household. I know livestock. I know accounts. I know how to stretch $1 over a winter that goes longer than it's supposed to. I'm not asking for anything from you except a chance to show that I can be useful here. Not as your wife. Just she paused, and for the first time her composure showed a hairline crack, something almost uncertain moving across her features. Just as someone who can earn her keep while she figures out what to do next. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. You latched the gate twice, he said. She blinked. What? The gate? Most people who don't know ranch land latch it once. You did it twice. He paused. You've been around livestock. My father ran a farm, she said, until he couldn't anymore. He turned that over for a moment. There was a story there, he could hear it, in the way she said those last 4 words. The way they carried extra weight, but he didn't ask. Not yet. The house needs work, he said instead. More work than I've had time to give it. The books are a disaster. The ranch hand I had last season didn't come back after Christmas, and I've been running this place myself since February. I can see that it needs work, Amelia said. She looked at the fence line he'd been mending with a practiced eye that was not unkind and not superior, just observant. The south pasture fencing is going to take at least 2 more days to finish properly. Nathan stared at her. I can see the gaps from here, she said, almost apologetically. Something moved in Nathan Cole's chest. He wasn't sure what to call it. He wasn't sure he wanted to name it at all. It felt like the beginning of something, and he had a long-established policy of being suspicious of beginnings. There's a room at the back of the house, he said slowly. Off the kitchen. It's used for storage, but it can be cleared out. It's not much, it's a room, she said. It's not proper, he said. People will talk. People are already talking, Amelia said. And there was something very dry in her voice that surprised a short exhale out of Nathan before he could stop it. Almost a laugh. He couldn't remember the last time he'd almost laughed. 3 months, he said. That's what I can offer. 3 months of honest work and fair pay. After that, we see where things stand. Amelia Carter held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, this small, bare-fingered hand extended across the space between them in the gray morning light, and then he shook it. Her grip was firm, of course it was. The first week was awkward in the way of 2 people learning the particular geography of each other's habits and rhythms, when they have no shared language yet, no shorthand, no established understanding of where one person's boundaries end and another's begin. Nathan was up before dawn and back from the pasture by mid-morning. Amelia was up earlier than he expected and had coffee made by the time he came in, which startled him the first morning and which he said nothing about, and the second morning he simply accepted the cup without comment. And by the third morning it had already become, without either of them deciding it, a kind of routine. She attacked the kitchen first. He came in on the second day to find her standing on a chair, reaching the upper shelves, pulling down everything that had accumulated over 4 years of a man living alone, which was to say a great deal of broken and mismatched things that no longer served any purpose except to take up space. She had made 3 piles on the table, things to keep, things to mend, things to discard, and she worked through them with a methodical speed that managed to be both efficient and somehow not unkind about it. Like she understood that every object had belonged to someone's life, and she was treating them accordingly. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched her work. I'm not replacing anything that matters, she said, without turning around, which meant she had heard him come in, even though he'd been quiet. Good ears filed that away. Nothing here matters, Nathan said. And then, after a moment, because that had come out wrong and slightly more bleak than he intended, I mean, the practical things. The kitchen tools and that sort of thing. I haven't paid much attention to any of it. I can see that, she said again, in exactly the same tone as before, and this time the dryness in it was unmistakable. She pulled down a tin pot with a handle held on by what appeared to be sheer stubbornness, and looked at it critically. This is a safety hazard. It boils water, so does a tin can. That doesn't make it a pot. He found himself wanting to defend the pot, and recognized the absurdity of that impulse and said nothing. She put it in the discard pile. He did not rescue it from the discard pile. He thought about it, He did not rescue it. The accounts were worse than he had told her. He had known, in a general way, that the books were in poor shape. He had not known, in a specific way, the degree to which they were in poor shape, because there was a particular mercy in choosing not to look too closely at things that frightened you. When Amelia sat down with the ledgers on the fourth day, she had asked, quietly, if she could have a look at them, and he had said yes before he thought better of it. She was quiet for a very long time. Nathan was doing saddle work at the table beside her, or trying to. He kept looking at her face. She didn't look alarmed. She looked the way when they are calculating something in their head that has a lot of numbers in it, and they are being very careful not to make a mistake. When did you last sell cattle? She asked. End of August. And before that, previous August. And the winter expenses, feed, supplies, the emergency repairs to the East Barn in February. I know what they add up to, Nathan said, and he meant it as a full stop, but it came out sounding defensive. I'm not criticizing, Amelia said. She looked up from the ledger. I'm trying to understand what we're working with. There's a difference. Nathan put down the saddle work. What we're working with, he repeated. She looked at him steadily. Unless you'd prefer I said what you're working with. He was quiet. It was just a word, she said quietly. I can change it. No, Nathan said. He turned back to the saddle. No, go ahead. She went back to the ledger. The lamp between them burned steadily in the quiet kitchen. And Nathan Cole pretended to work on the saddle and actually sat there, listening to the soft scratch of Amelia's pencil against the page, and tried to identify the strange feeling that was building slowly in his chest, like the pressure change before a storm. It took him a long time to name it. It was the feeling of not being alone. And it scared him more than anything in that ledger. The first real trouble came from a quarter Nathan should have expected. His nearest neighbor and longest-standing irritant, Hattie McPherson, appeared at the gate on Saturday morning with what she clearly considered a social call and what Nathan recognized immediately as reconnaissance. Hattie was in her 60s, had been widowed twice, ran a boarding house with an iron hand, and had the particular gift of being able to deliver the most cutting possible observation in the warmest possible tone. So that by the time you realized you'd been insulted, she was already 2 sentences further along and smiling. She came in under the pretense of bringing a pie. Nathan accepted the pie and introduced Amelia, and Hattie looked at Amelia the way a person looks at something they have not quite classified yet. So you're staying on, then, Hattie said, the kind of not quite a question that was actually entirely a question. For now, Amelia said, doing housekeeping and such. Among other things. Must be strange, Hattie said pleasantly, coming all this way expecting a husband and ending up a housekeeper instead. The room went very quiet. Nathan opened his mouth. Amelia spoke first. I expect a lot of things have turned out different from what people expected, she said, looking directly at Hattie with an expression that was perfectly polite and somehow utterly unrattled. I find the unexpected tends to be more interesting than the planned. Hattie blinked. Then she laughed a genuine laugh, surprised out of her, and looked at Amelia with something that might have been the first stirring of respect. You'll do all right, Hattie said, just. And she leaned in slightly, dropping her voice as if this was something confidential, though she clearly didn't mind if Nathan heard. Don't let him push you around. He doesn't mean to, but he's been alone so long he's forgotten how to make room for another person. Hattie, Nathan said. I'm going, she said cheerfully. You can keep the pie. She left. Nathan stood in the kitchen after she'd gone and did not look at Amelia, and was aware that not looking at Amelia was a choice he was making. She means well, he said finally. I know, Amelia said. She picked up the pie and put it on the shelf. She's right, too. Nathan said nothing. About you forgetting how to make room, Amelia added, and her voice was entirely matter-of-fact. No accusation in it. The same tone she might use to point out that the south pasture fence needed 2 more days. He should have argued. He didn't argue. Because the terrible thing, the thing he couldn't have predicted when he'd sent that letter, when he'd stood in the street and said those words in front of the whole town, was that she was right. And the worst part of being told something true by someone you barely know is that you cannot pretend it isn't true, because you have no long history of them being wrong about you to fall back on. He had been alone so long he had forgotten how to make room. And this woman, this stranger in a dark blue dress with her one bag and her twice-latched gates, and her pencil scratching through his ledgers, was already 8 days into whatever this was already making him remember. Things he had worked very hard to forget. On the 9th day, the horse got loose. One of the younger geldings, a bay Nathan had been working with for most of the spring, temperamental and not yet fully broke, got out of the corral somewhere around noon. Nathan was repairing a section of the barn roof and didn't hear it happen, and by the time he came down and saw the open gate and the empty corral, the horse had a substantial head start. He hit the ground running. It took him 20 minutes to track the gelding to the north end of the property, where it had gotten itself tangled in the fence line along the creek bank and was working itself into the kind of panicked frenzy that could end with a broken leg for the horse and a broken arm for whoever tried to help it. Nathan approached slowly, speaking low, the way you had to approach a frightened animal, slow and low and even, no sudden movements. Just the sound of your voice, saying the same simple things over and over until some part of the animal's brain understood that the voice meant safety. It wasn't working. The gelding was too far gone in its panic, lunging and twisting, the wire biting in deeper every time it moved. And then a voice came from behind Nathan, steady even, lower than he would have expected from her, different from how she spoke to people, saying something that wasn't quite words, something that was more sound than language. A kind of humming cadence that rose and fell with the same rhythm a horse used when it was trying to settle itself. Nathan turned. Amelia was standing 10 feet behind him, having come up so quietly he hadn't heard her, and she was making that sound, that soft, rhythmic, almost musical sound, and her eyes were entirely on the horse. Not on the wire, not on the danger, on the horse. She moved forward. Past Nathan slowly. "Easy," she murmured, "easy now. No one's going to hurt you. I know you're scared. I know everything feels wrong right now. But it's going to be all right." The gelding's ears moved. Not calm, not yet, but listening. The frantic energy in its body changed by some fraction, some small but measurable degree, and it stopped lunging and stood trembling in the wire. Amelia got her hands on the animal's neck. She kept talking, kept making that sound, and Nathan Cole, who had been ranching since he was 14 years old, and who knew horses the way some people knew scripture, stood back and watched this woman from Kansas City work one of the most panicked animals he had ever seen into something approaching stillness, and felt the world shift very slightly under his feet. Together, her holding the horse steady, him working the wire, they got the gelding free in about 15 minutes. It was shaking when they finished. So was Amelia's hands, Nathan noticed. Just barely, but he noticed, the adrenaline coming down. "You've done that before," he said. "Yes, your father's farm." Yes, she was stroking the horse's nose, not looking at Nathan. "He had difficult animals sometimes. You learn. Where did you learn that sound?" She was quiet for a moment. "My mother," she said. "She used to do it. I don't know where she learned it. I just remember hearing it when I was small, when something needed calming." She said it simply, without sentimentality. But there was something in those last words, "when something needed calming," that told Nathan the story wasn't entirely about horses. He led the gelding back toward the corral. Amelia walked beside him. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was different from the silence of the first day. He noticed that too. The first day's silence had been the silence of strangers occupying shared space and maintaining careful distance. This silence was something else, not comfort, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The beginning of a kind of ease that neither of them had gone looking for, and neither of them quite knew what to do with. At the corral gate, Nathan latched it, once, and then without thinking about it, just from the habit of attention that comes from watching another person do something the right way twice. He felt Amelia notice. He did not look at her. He walked back toward the barn. And behind him, quiet enough that he could pretend he hadn't heard it if he needed to, he heard her exhale. Something that was almost not quite, but almost a laugh. It was the 9th day. He had 22 more days before he would let himself think about what any of this meant. He told himself that. He knew, even as he told himself, that it was already too late. He told himself 22 days. By the end of the second week, he had stopped counting. It wasn't a decision he made consciously. It was more like the way water finds the lowest point in a field, not choosing, exactly, just following the shape of the land. Nathan Cole had spent 4 years in the shape of his days around the certainty of solitude, around the reliable emptiness of a house that asked nothing of him. And in 12 days, Amelia Carter had rearranged enough of that landscape that he kept reaching for the old shape and finding it wasn't quite where he'd left it. The kitchen smelled different. That was the smallest thing, and somehow the most disorienting. 4 years of coffee boiled too long, and bread he never quite got right, and now there was something else underneath those smells, something that wasn't fancy, wasn't elaborate, just the smell of food made by someone who knew what they were doing. And it hit him every time he came through the door, in a way he couldn't have explained to anyone without sounding slightly unhinged. She had organized the supply room. He hadn't asked her to. He hadn't even mentioned it. He'd come in from the north pasture on the Wednesday of the second week and found the door to the supply room standing open, and Amelia inside it, taking inventory on a scrap of paper with the same focused attention she brought to everything. And the room that had been a dark disaster of accumulated disorder since before Clara died was now not perfect, not overhauled, just organized. Things where they belonged, things that had been buried for years, pulled forward where they could be found. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. "I made a list of what needs replacing," she said. "When you go into town next, I can tell you what's most urgent." Nathan looked at the room, at the shelves, at the order that hadn't been there yesterday. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. But it needed doing. She went back to her list. He went back to the pasture. And somewhere on the walk, back out to the cattle, in the cold, bright air of a Montana morning, Nathan Cole had a thought that he immediately tried to put away and couldn't quite manage. She does things not because someone asks her to, but because she sees what needs to be done. And then she does it, as if need is its own sufficient reason. He had known very few people like that in his life. He had loved one of them once. He put that thought away harder than the first one and walked faster toward the cattle. The thing about the books was this: they were bad, but they were not as bad as Nathan had feared, which was somehow worse, because if they had been as bad as he feared, then the situation would have been clear, and clear situations were manageable. What Amelia found instead was something more complicated than disaster. It was a slow, grinding drift toward disaster that could still be corrected, but only if someone was paying very close attention over a long period of time. Only if someone was watching the numbers, the way you watched a patient whose fever was high, but not yet breaking carefully, consistently, without looking away. She laid it out for him on a Thursday evening, the ledger open between them. 2 cups of coffee, going cold on either side of it. "The problem isn't this year," she said. "This year you'll make it if the fall cattle drive goes well. The problem is next year, and the year after." Nathan looked at the numbers she'd marked. "The east pasture," he said. "The east pasture," she confirmed. "If you lose the grazing rights on the eastern stretch, you're down to 2/3 of your capacity. You can't run enough cattle on 2/3 to cover your winter costs and still have enough to sell in the fall." "I know. Do you know that someone has been filing complaints with the county land office about your eastern boundary?" Nathan went still. "Where did you hear that?" "I didn't hear it. I found it." She turned the ledger sideways and slid a different paper toward him. A letter he saw, one he'd received months ago and barely read, and then buried under other things because he hadn't wanted to deal with it. "This came in February. You opened it. But I don't think you read past the first paragraph." Nathan picked up the letter. He read the first paragraph. Then he set it down. "Richard Blackwell," he said. Amelia nodded. Richard Blackwell was the largest cattle operation in the region, which meant he had more money, more lawyers, and more political connections than any man in a county like this had any legitimate right to have. He had been buying up land for 3 years, quietly and methodically, the way a careful hunter positions himself downwind. Nathan had known Blackwell was expanding. He hadn't known Blackwell had set his sights specifically on the Cole Ranch's eastern boundary. "How did you find this?" It was in the pile under the February receipts, Amelia said. I went through everything, every piece of paper that came into this house in the last year. I know it wasn't my place to. No, Nathan said. No, you were right to. He picked up the letter again. Put it down. I should have read it. You were dealing with a lot in February, she said, and there was no judgment in it. Just the observation of someone who had read between the lines of a year's worth of accounts and understood what the numbers said about the man who'd been living with them. Nathan looked at her. She looked back, and for a moment neither of them looked away, and Nathan had the discomfiting experience of feeling genuinely seen by someone who had no particular reason to see him charitably, and was choosing to anyway. I need to talk to the county office, he said. Yes, she said. And soon. He's filed 3 separate complaints in 6 months. The pattern suggests he's trying to establish grounds for a formal boundary dispute. You know about land law? My father had a boundary dispute with a neighbor when I was 16, she said. It lasted 3 years. I sat in on every meeting. I read every document. She paused. We lost. She said it flatly, without drama, but Nathan caught the thing underneath it, the particular flatness of a story that didn't end well. Stated plainly because the person telling it has had enough time to make peace with it, but has never quite forgotten what it cost. I'm sorry, he said. It's why I know what to look for, she said. And what I'm looking for in your situation worries me. Nathan sat back. Outside, the wind had come up. He could feel it against the walls, the particular pressing cold of a Montana night in spring, and the lamp between them swayed slightly. In the moving light, Amelia's face was serious and focused and utterly without pretension, and Nathan thought, not for the first time, and with increasing discomfort, that this woman was not at all what he had expected. He had expected someone quiet and capable and largely invisible, someone who would manage the domestic machinery of the ranch without complicating the emotional machinery of his own interior. He had gotten someone who was quiet and capable and visible in a way that made it very difficult to look anywhere else. I'll go to the county office on Monday, he said. I can write out the key points from the ledger and the letter, Amelia said. If you want something to bring with you, I'd appreciate that. She nodded and started to close the ledger. Amelia, he said. She paused. He almost didn't say it. He had not been a man who said things like this easily, not in recent memory, and possibly not before that. But he said it anyway, because she had spent most of 2 weeks seeing what needed to be done and doing it, and the very least he could do was acknowledge that. Thank you, he said, for finding this, for he stopped. For paying attention. Something crossed her face. Small and quickly controlled, but he saw it, something that looked like it had been hoping for exactly those words, and hadn't expected them. You're welcome, she said. She closed the ledger. The lamp swayed again. They both reached for their cold coffee at the same time, and their hands didn't touch, but they were close enough that Nathan was aware of the exact inch of space between them, and he thought, with a clarity that was almost unpleasant in its precision, I am in a great deal of trouble. He drank his coffee. He said nothing else. He was very good at saying nothing else. It was possibly the most self-defeating talent he possessed. The Monday trip to the county office went badly. Not catastrophically, not yet, but badly enough. The clerk at the land office was a young man named Patterson, who was not unkind but who was clearly out of his depth with a filing as complex as the Blackwell complaints, and who kept referring Nathan to a supervisor who was not in the office that day, and then to a different supervisor who was also not available. Until Nathan was standing in the corridor of the county building with a folder of documents Amelia had prepared her, and no one to hand them to. He rode back to the ranch in a mood that he would have described, in his internal vocabulary, as controlled frustration, and which anyone looking at his face would have described as fury wearing patience as a thin disguise. Amelia was at the fence along the south pasture. When he got back, she had taken to doing smaller repair work herself in the hours when Nathan was gone. Not the heavy structural work, but the things that could be managed, with a pair of hands and a good toolkit. And Nathan had stopped trying to tell her she didn't need to because it was clear she found it more productive than sitting and waiting. And also she was better at it than he'd expected, which was a pattern he was getting used to. She looked up when she heard his horse. She read his expression. "What happened?" she asked. "Nobody there to take the filing," Nathan said. He dismounted, handed her the folder. "I'll have to go back Wednesday." Amelia opened the folder, looked through it. Her expression was still for a moment, and then she said quietly, "Nathan, the boundary marker on the eastern edge, do you have your original deed?" "It's in the house." "Why?" "Because if Patterson couldn't take your filing, it means the complaints Blackwell filed are still sitting as uncontested." She looked up. An uncontested complaint in a boundary dispute can be treated as an implied concessions after 30 days. Depending on when his last filing was. "How long do I have?" She looked at the letter again, did the calculation. And Nathan watched her face do the thing it did when the sent her something she didn't want to have to report. 11 days, she said. He stood very still. 11 days to get a formal response on record, she said. Or the county can rule on his complaints without your input. Nathan took the folder from her. He went into the house. He found the deed in the back of the strongbox under his cot, the same strongbox that held everything that mattered, that he had not opened since the last time he'd checked to make sure it was still there, the way a person checks on something they're afraid to look at directly. And he brought it out to the kitchen table and spread it next to Amelia's notes. She sat across from him. They worked through the afternoon. It was the first time Nathan had seen her genuinely worried, not panicked, not overwhelmed, but worried in the way of a person who is intelligent enough to understand exactly what a situation could cost, and is working to prevent it from costing that. She moved through the documents with a speed and purposefulness that he found himself simply trying to keep up with. She knew things he didn't know about the specific language of land claims, about the difference between a surveyed boundary and a described boundary, about the particular ways a complaint could be filed so that it looked straightforwards, but carried implications that weren't obvious until you'd seen that kind of filing before. "Your father's dispute," Nathan said at some point in the middle of the afternoon. "Yes," she said without looking up. "I told you, I read everything." "But you were 16. She looked up at that, just for a moment. "My mother had just died," she said. "My father couldn't focus. Someone had to." She went back to the papers. "I got very good at reading documents that summer." Nathan said nothing. There were things in what she'd just said that he recognized, the way a crisis forces a person into capabilities they didn't know they had. The way grief and necessity work together to forge something in a person that wasn't there before. He recognized them because he had been formed by something similar. Losing Clara had broken him in ways he still couldn't fully map. It had also made him capable of surviving things he'd never have survived before. He wondered, and then stopped wondering, because it felt too close to something he wasn't ready to examine, whether that was part of why this woman did not feel like a stranger anymore. They got the counterfiling, drafted by early evening. It was careful and specific, and Amelia had written most of it, in a clear hand that was nothing like the halting formality he'd have managed on his own. Citing the original deed measurements, and the date of Nathan's ownership registration, and the specific legal insufficiency of Blackwell's most recent complaint. Nathan read through it 3 times. "This is good," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "Whether it's good depends on who reads it." "Where did you stop?" "Started again. You didn't just read documents that summer. You learned the law, enough of it," she said. "Enough to know when someone is using it as a weapon." She said it quietly, but Nathan heard the edge underneath it, the particular sharpness of someone who has been on the receiving end of that kind of weapon, and has never forgiven it. Not in a bitter way. In the way of a person who has taken the wound and turned it into something useful. He wanted to ask about her father, about what had happened to the farm, about the $40 and the 1 bag, the decision to answer a letter from a stranger in Montana. But there was a moment in which things could be asked, and a moment in which the asking would be an intrusion, and he had spent enough time learning to read silences that he knew which moment this was. "Get some rest," he said instead. "I'll ride to the county office first thing Wednesday." She nodded. She gathered the papers. At the door of the kitchen she paused. "Nathan," she said. He looked up. "Don't let them rush you in that office," she said. "They'll try to. Patterson especially. Just be slow and deliberate, and make sure every page gets stamped with the receipt date. I know how to hold my ground, he said. I know you do, she said. And there was something in those 4 words, the simple, unelaborated certainty in them, that Nathan felt go somewhere unexpected in his chest. Not like a blow. More like the way sunlight goes through a window you've kept shuttered so long. You'd forgotten the warmth of it. She went to her room. He sat at the table for a while longer. He was going to have to be more careful. He had been telling himself that with increasing frequency and decreasing conviction. Wednesday morning, Nathan rode into Silver Creek early, before most of the town was fully awake, and went directly to the county office. Patterson was there this time, and so was the supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Garrett, who had the careful, watchful air of someone who had learned to conduct himself neutrally in a county where the largest landowner had very specific ideas about how things should go. Garrett took the filing. He read it, slowly, which Nathan took as a sign that the man was actually reading it, rather than skimming it for form's sake. He looked up. "This is a solid counterfiling," he said. "I have a solid claim," Nathan said. "Blackwell's going to push back." "I expect he will." Garrett looked at him steadily. "Blackwell has a lawyer from Billings. A good one." "I'm aware that Blackwell has resources I don't have," Nathan said, keeping his voice flat and even. "That's not a new condition. What I'm saying," Garrett said, lowering his voice slightly, which told Nathan more than the words themselves, "is that you're going to need someone who knows kind of filing. Because his lawyer is going to find every gap, and every technicality, and every... The filing is technically complete," Nathan said. Garrett paused. "It is," he said, and there was something in his voice, now a kind of surprise that told Nathan he had expected something considerably less thorough. "How did you—" "I had help," Nathan said. "He got the receipt stamp." He counted the pages twice, the way Amelia had told him to. He got Garrett's initials on the cover letter. He rode back to the ranch. He came through the gate latching it twice, automatically, without thinking about it, and found Amelia in the kitchen, working through the week's supply accounts. She looked up. He said, "Receipt stamp?" and initialed. She let out a breath. "Good." And then, more quietly, almost to herself, "Good." Nathan hung his coat. Garrett said the filing was technically complete, he said. He seemed surprised. Amelia looked back down at her accounts. He shouldn't be. He expected something put together by a rancher, in a hurry, Nathan said. What he got was something put together by someone who knew what she was doing. Amelia was quiet for a moment. "My father knew what he was doing too," she said. "It didn't save the farm," "I know," Nathan said. "But you said it yourself. You know what to look for now. Things you didn't know then." She looked up at him. He held her gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, some wordless acknowledgement of neither of them was ready to put into words. The particular recognition of two people who have been broken by different things and have arrived, by very different roads, at the same scarred and careful place. "We'll see," she said. "Yes," Nathan said, "we will." He sat down at the table across from her. He pulled the supply accounts toward him and started going through the numbers. Side by side, like they had done this 100 times. Like it was already, somehow, the most natural thing in the world. The third week brought rain, and with the rain came the first real test of what they were building without admitting they were building it. The south pasture flooded, not catastrophically, not deep enough to drown anything, but enough to drive the cattle out of their grazing ground and into the northern sections, which were already running close to capacity. Nathan needed to move the herd, reorganize the grazing rotation, and do it fast enough that the animals didn't lose too much condition before the ground dried out again. It was the kind of problem that required more than one person and more than one set of hands, and Nathan had been managing the ranch alone long enough that he had developed workarounds for that reality. But workarounds were slow, and slow cost condition, and condition cost money, and money was exactly what they didn't have in abundance right now. He was at the corral, at first light organizing the horses, when Amelia appeared in her clothes, the worn wool jacket, and the practical skirt she'd changed into at some point during her first week. having clearly decided that what she'd arrived in was not adequate for actual ranch work, and said, "What do you need?" Nathan looked at her. He thought about saying she didn't have to help with this, that it was heavy work, that she should stay close to the house. He thought about how she had gotten that gelding quiet in 15 minutes. He thought about how she had read 3 years of his accounts in 4 days and found what he'd missed. "Can you drive cattle?" he said. "I've done it," she said. "Not a large herd, but I've done it. Stay on the left flank," he said. "Don't let them push toward the creek. If any of them break toward the east boundary, let me know. Don't try to turn them yourself. Some of them are still unpredictable." She nodded. "And if you need to stop or fall back, stop or fall back. Don't push past what you can manage safely." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite exasperation, and was somehow both of those things at once. "I'll let you know," she said. "Good," he said. They worked together for most of the morning. It was hard physical work in wet conditions, and Nathan had enough on his mind, managing the herd and the terrain, that he couldn't spend much attention on Amelia, but, in the fragments of attention he could spare, he kept noticing things. She stayed where he'd told her to stay. She read the cattle well, anticipating their movements rather than reacting to them, which was the difference between someone who knew animals and someone who didn't. When one of the younger steers made a dash toward the east, she didn't go after it herself. She called out to Nathan and held the line on the rest while he turned the steer, and it was exactly the right call. By the time they got the herd settled in the northern section, Nathan was soaked through and his hands were raw, and he was more tired than he'd been in a while. Because tired was different when you were doing it alone versus doing it alongside someone. The weight of it distributed differently. He tied off his horse. Amelia tied off hers. They stood for a moment without talking, both of them breathing hard, and then Amelia made a sound. He looked at her. She was looking at her own hands, red from the cold and the rope work, and she had not made a complaining sound, he realized. It was more like the sound of a person taking stock, acknowledging the cost of a thing. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "My hands are complaining about it." "The rest of me is fine." He looked at her hands. "Come inside," he said. "There's salve." She started to say she was fine again, and he said, more sharply than he intended, "Amelia." "Come inside." She stopped. He softened his voice. "Please." And she came inside. In the kitchen, Nathan found the tin of salve that had been in the supply room he'd known where it was, suddenly, now that the room was organized, and he put it on the table, and then stood there for a moment because the practical thing was clear and the doing of it was more complicated. "Give me your hands," he said. She looked at him. "You've been working your hands raw for 3 weeks on this ranch," he said. "The least I can do is help prevent them cracking." Slowly she put her hands on the table, palms up. He sat across from her. He opened the tin. He worked the salve into her hands carefully, methodically, the way he did everything, and he was aware of every second of it, of the roughness of her palms and the calluses already forming, and the way she held, very still and didn't make a sound, and seemed to be looking at something over his shoulder rather than at his face. He didn't say anything either, he just did the work. When he finished, he put the tin down. She pulled her hands back slowly. "Thank you," she said very quietly. He said yes, because your welcome felt inadequate, and everything else he could think of felt dangerous. Then she stood up and went to the stove to start something for supper, and Nathan sat at the table with the tin of salve in front of him, and the feeling in his chest that was no longer anything he could pretend was uncomplicated. He was not falling in love. He told himself that. He was aware, even as he told himself, of how completely and how quietly the ground had shifted under his feet. Outside, the rain came down. Inside, something that had no name yet, and was not yet asking for one, moved through the cold house, like the first warmth of a fire, newly lit, tentative, real, fragile, as the moment before it decides whether to catch or die. Nathan Cole was afraid of fire, but he had stopped moving away from it. The rain stopped on a Friday. By Saturday morning, Richard Blackwell's lawyer had sent a letter. Nathan found it in the post when he rode into Silver Creek for supplies, tucked between a seed catalog and a bill from the feed store, looking entirely ordinary from the outside, and carrying nothing ordinary inside. He read it standing at the post office counter, and the postmaster, a talkative man named Els, who had never once in Nathan's memory read the room correctly, started to say something about the weather clearing up, took one look at Nathan's face and decided not to. Nathan folded the letter. He finished his errands. He rode home at a pace that was not quite a gallop, but was not the measured walk of a man who had nothing on his mind. Amelia was at the kitchen table when he came in, working through a mending pile she'd taken on as a secondary task when the accounts were in order, and she looked up at his face and put the mending down before he'd even crossed the threshold. "What happened?" she said. He put the letter on the table. She read it. He watched her read it, watched the small, controlled changes in her expression as she moved through the paragraphs, the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible press of her lips at one particular passage that Nathan had also noticed. "He's not disputing the boundary anymore," she said. "No," Nathan said. "He's changed tactics. He's claiming your Eastern grazing lease was conditionally registered and that the condition was never fulfilled." She looked up. "Is that true? Is there a condition on the original lease?" "I don't know," Nathan said. "I bought the ranch from old Gerald Hatch 11 years ago. Gerald handled the original registration. I took over the lease along with everything else. So you may never have seen the original lease document." "I have a copy. I've had a copy." He stopped. "You just never read it closely," she said. "Not an accusation." "No," he said. "I didn't." She stood up. "Where is it?" "Strongbox." She was already moving toward the back room. Nathan went with her, pulled the strongbox out, sorted through the papers inside with a speed born of 11 days of urgency and the unpleasant sensation of time running out from underneath him. He found the lease document and handed it to her. She took it to the kitchen table. She read it the way she read everything completely, without skimming, without letting her expression get ahead of her understanding. Nathan stood across the table and watched her, and felt the particular helplessness of a man who has given the only tool available to someone else, and must now simply wait to learn whether it's enough. She turned to the third page and she stopped. "Nathan," she said. "What? There's a condition." Her voice was very even. Too even. The particular evenness of someone who has learned to stay steady when steadiness matters most. The original lease from Hatch's registration includes a use continuity clause. The Eastern grazing rights remain valid as long as the land is in continuous active use. I've been running cattle on that stretch for 11 years. "I know," she said, "but the clause requires documented evidence of continuous use. Recorded at the county office, annually." She looked up. "When did you last file an annual use record?" Nathan went still. Amelia held his gaze. "I didn't know I had to file an annual use record," he said. The silence that followed was not long, but it was very heavy. "Blackwell's lawyer knows about this clause," she said. "That's why he shifted his argument. He's not trying to win a boundary dispute. He's trying to establish that you've been in technical violation of the lease terms for years, which would give him grounds to challenge the validity of the entire eastern section." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put both hands flat on the table. He breathed. "How bad is it?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "I need to think about this. I need to look at the county filing requirements and figure out if there's a cure period, a window, after a discovered violation, in which you can file retroactively to bring the record into compliance." She was already reaching for her notes. "This is solvable. It might be solvable. Don't assume it isn't until we know it isn't." "Amelia," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Don't start losing before you know you've lost," she said. "It's a habit that costs more than the losing does." He stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded. She put her head down and went to work. He went out to check the cattle because there was always work to be done, and because he needed to move, needed the cold air and the physical reality of the land under his feet, the specific weight of a problem he knew how to solve after the specific weight of a problem he didn't. But his mind stayed in that kitchen. It stayed on the woman at his table, who had been in his house for 3 weeks, and who was fighting for his ranch with more focus and more expertise than he had any right to expect from anyone, let alone someone who owed him nothing, who had every reason to have taken the stagecoach back east, and saved herself the trouble of all of this. He stopped at the fence line of the eastern pasture. He looked at it. 11 years of his life were in this land. The 11 years after Clara. The years he'd spent building something to fill the space where a future used to be, building it not because he wanted a future anymore, but because work was what kept a man from falling apart, and the ranch had been the work that saved him. He was not going to lose it to Richard Blackwell's lawyers. He turned back toward the house. He was going to need more than stubbornness. He was going to need Amelia Carter, and he realized with a clarity that was both clarifying and deeply unwelcome, beginning to need her in ways that had nothing to do with land law. He walked faster. He did not examine that thought. He was becoming very practiced at not examining that thought. By Sunday evening, Amelia had found the cure period. It was buried in the county land regulations, a provision that allowed a leaseholder who had been in actual continuous use of a property to file a retroactive compliance record within 60 days of receiving written notice of a violation claim, provided the filing was accompanied by sworn documentation of use. Sworn documentation, Nathan said. Witnesses, Amelia said. People who can attest to having seen you working that eastern stretch. Consistently, over time, she looked at him. Your ranch hands from previous seasons? They're scattered. One went to Wyoming, one I don't know where. Neighboring ranchers? Anyone who rides that stretch regularly? Nathan thought. Webb Calloway, he said. His property runs along the northern edge of my eastern section. He'd have seen me out there, a pause, and old Hattie McPherson's brother runs a small operation 2 miles east. He'd have seen it too. Can you get signed statements from them? I can ask. Ask fast, she said. We have 60 days from the date of the letter. That sounds like a lot. It isn't, when a lawyer is filing objections at every step. Nathan stood up. I'll ride to Webb's tomorrow, he said. First thing, she nodded. I'll draft the statement form tonight, she said. Something clear and specific enough that their signatures will hold up if this goes to a formal hearing. He looked at her. The lamp was burning low. It was late, later than he usually stayed up, later than she usually stayed up, and she had a pencil behind her ear and ink on her second finger, and she looked exactly like what she was, which was someone who had been working very hard for a very long time, and somehow that simple reality hit Nathan with a force that surprised him. You should sleep, he said. I will, she said, after I draft it. Amelia, I'll be quick, she said, and picked up her pencil. He stood there for a moment, longer than made sense for a man who had nothing left to say. Then he went to bed. He did not sleep well. He didn't sleep well for different reasons than usual, which was its own kind of progress and its own kind of problem. Webb Calloway signed the statement without hesitation. He was a big, plain-spoken man of about 60 who had been Nathan's neighbor for 7 years and who had a deep and uncomplicated dislike of Richard Blackwell that he did not bother to conceal. You tell me what you need, he said, when Nathan explained the situation, and I'll give it to you. That man has been swallowing this county 1 acre at a time, and nobody's done a damn thing to stop him. He read the statement form Amelia had drafted, nodded twice, and signed it. Who wrote this? He asked. Someone who knows what they're doing, Nathan said. Webb looked at him. Something moved in the older man's expression. The woman from the stagecoach, he said. The one who stayed. Yes, Nathan said. Webb said nothing for a moment. Then, you're a lucky man, Nathan. I'm not sure you know it yet. Nathan took the signed statement and rode on to find Hattie's brother. Emmett McPherson was harder to reach and harder to persuade, not because he was unwilling, but because he was elderly and his memory, he worried aloud, might not be sufficiently reliable for legal purposes. Nathan sat with him for an hour, being patient in the particular way you had to be patient with people who needed time to trust what their own recollections were telling them. And at the end of the hour, Emmett had not only signed the statement, but had remembered 3 specific occasions, dates, and approximate conditions, and the particular section of fence line he'd seen Nathan working that strengthened the filing considerably. Nathan rode back with both statements, and arrived to find that Amelia was not alone in the kitchen. Hattie McPherson was at the table with her. They were drinking coffee and talking with an ease that suggested this was not their first conversation of the afternoon. And they looked up when Nathan came in with a quality of synchrony that he found mildly alarming. The way it was always mildly alarming when women who were clearly more perceptive than you had been in a room together for an undetermined amount of time. "I got both statements," he said. "Good," said Amelia. She reached for them. "I've been telling your girl about Blackwell," Hattie said. Nathan set down the statements. "She's not my girl, Hattie." "I know she's not," Hattie said pleasantly. "That's why I called her that. To watch your face." She looked at Nathan with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to find other people's emotions considerably more entertaining than their denials of those emotions. "Richard Blackwell has been talking around town," she said, in a different, more serious tone. "About the ranch, about you, about," she glanced briefly at Amelia, "about the current situation here. He's been implying that you're in serious financial and legal trouble, and that it's only a matter of time before you have to sell." Nathan felt the cold come back. He's trying to move public opinion before the filing. He's trying to make sure that when the time comes, people believe you had no choice, Hattie said. That you sold because you had to, not because he forced you. "He hasn't won anything yet," Nathan said. "No," Hattie said. "But people are talking, and in a town like this, talk has weight." She left shortly after. Nathan stood at the table with the two statements in his hands and felt the thing that was most dangerous in a fight like this, not the legal complexity, not the financial pressure, but the creeping, grinding awareness that the battle was on more fronts than he could defend simultaneously. Amelia took the statements from him. She read through them. She made notes in the margin of her draft filing. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, without looking up, "He's doing to your reputation what he's doing to your legal standing. Creating uncertainty, making people think the outcome is inevitable before it's been decided." "I know," Nathan said, "so we make sure people know it's not inevitable." She looked up. "Monday, when you go to the county office, be visible about it. Don't go quietly. Let people see you filing. Let them see that you're fighting. And if Blackwell's lawyer files a counter-objection to the statements, then we deal with that when it happens," she said. "But we don't give ground before we have to." Nathan looked at her. "You're angry," he said. "Yes," she said. "About Blackwell, about people who use power as a weapon against people who have less of it," she said. "Yes. I've been angry about that for a long time." She returned to her notes, but the set of her shoulders had changed something tighter, something more resolved. "My father lost his farm to someone doing exactly this. Not quite this, but close enough. Someone who filed legal challenges until my father couldn't afford to keep answering them. Someone who understood that the law, if you use it correctly, can grind a person down, even when you don't have a right to win." "Amelia," she kept writing, "he's not going to get this ranch," Nathan said. She stopped writing. "I'm going to make sure of it," he said. She looked up at him. There was something in her face in that moment, something that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, but was the expression of a person who has been quietly carrying a weight alone, and has just felt another set of hands take hold of part of it. The expression of someone who has believed for perhaps slightly too long that they had to be the only one paying attention. "I know," she said. "I know you will." And then, because neither of them was prepared to navigate what was happening in the space between those words, she went back to her notes, and Nathan went to check the horses, and they did not speak again until supper. And supper was quiet, in the particular way of people who have said more than they intended, and are now being very careful about what they say next. The Monday filing went exactly as Amelia had predicted. Nathan walked into the county office in full view of the main street of Silver Creek, at a time of day when the street was at its most populated, carrying his filing folder with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who was not worried about being seen, because being seen was the point. He exchanged greetings with Webb Calloway, who happened to be in town, and who was visible about that greeting in a way that told Nathan Webb understood the value of optics. He spoke briefly with two other ranchers in the corridor of the county building, men who had their own reasons to distrust Blackwell's expansion, and who were watching this particular fight with more than casual interest. Garrett received the retroactive compliance filing and the sworn statements. He looked through them carefully. He looked up at Nathan. "This is thorough," he said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Blackwell's lawyer is going to object to the retroactive nature of the record." "He can object," Nathan said. "The regulation allows it." "It's on the record that it allows it." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Who prepared these statements?" "Someone who knows what she's doing," Nathan said for the second time in a week. Garrett seemed to recognize that he was going to get nothing more informative than that, and stamped the filing. Nathan walked back out into the main street. He walked slowly. He let himself be seen. He was halfway down the street when he came face to face with Richard Blackwell himself. It happened without warning, Blackwell stepping out of the general store at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on your perspective, and for a second, both men simply stood there in the middle of Silver Creek's main street in the blunt October light. Blackwell was a few years older than Nathan, heavier through the shoulders, with the particular ease of a man who had not had to fight for anything in a long time, and had forgotten what it felt like. He had the kind of face that was handsome at a glance, and harder on closer examination. He smiled at Nathan with the professional warmth of a man who conducted his most damaging business in the language of pleasantry. "Nathan," he said, "how are things at the coal ranch?" "Good," Nathan said, "and getting better." Blackwell's smile stayed exactly where it was. "I heard you were filing some papers." "You'll be hearing more about it," Nathan said. "I have good lawyers," Blackwell said, not threateningly. Conversationally, which was worse. "I have a good case," Nathan said. "I'll take that," he walked on. He did not look back. His hands were steady. His voice had been steady. The thing running under his skin that was not quite calm, that was closer to the hot wire of a man holding his nerve by deliberate force, he kept entirely out of his face and his bearing. Because Blackwell was the kind of man who fed on visible uncertainty the way a fire fed on dry wood, and Nathan Cole was not going to give him the fuel. He rode home. He told Amelia about the encounter. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's measuring you," she said. "Testing whether the filing scared you or steadied you." "What did he find?" "That's what I'm wondering," she said, looking at him. "He found a man who's not selling," Nathan said. Something in Amelia's expression shifted. "Good," she said softly, "good." 2 days later, the second letter from Blackwell's lawyer arrived. It was the counter-objection Garrett had predicted. Longer this time, more technical, full of language designed to obscure rather than clarify, the legal equivalent of mud thrown at a window. Nathan read it and felt the particular frustration of a man who knows he's being handled, but can't quite find the specific mechanism of the handling. He handed it to Amelia. She read it. Her expression went through several changes. "None of them good. He's challenging the validity of Webb's statement," she said. "He's claiming Webb has a material interest in the outcome because Blackwell made an offer on Webb's property last spring, and Webb declined." She looked up. "If he can establish that Webb has a parole grievance against Blackwell, he can argue the statement is biased." "Webb's statement is true," Nathan said. "Truth and admissibility are different questions," Amelia said. The flatness was back in her voice, the controlled flatness of someone who has been here before and knows exactly how ugly it gets. "We need another witness, someone who doesn't have any history with Blackwell. Someone whose testimony is beyond that kind of challenge." Emmett McPherson is 81 years old and acknowledged memory concerns in the statement itself, she said. "Blackwell's lawyer will attack his reliability." "Then who?" She was quiet. Nathan paced. He rarely paced. He was not a man who showed his anxiety in his body, but this slow, grinding, methodical dismantling of every foothold he managed to establish was getting under his skin in a way that direct confrontation never had. You could face a man in a street. You could outwork a storm. But you could not fistfight a lawyer's letter. "The county surveyor," Amelia said. Nathan stopped pacing. "What? If the county has conducted any surveys of that eastern section in the past decade, the surveyor's notes would document the presence of cattle and working ranch operations. It's an official record, not a personal statement. It can't be challenged as biased." Nathan stared at her. He tried to think of a reason that wouldn't work and couldn't find one. "How do we get the survey records?" "Public request," she said. "They're public documents. I can file the request tomorrow morning." Amelia, if you ride into the county office. I've been riding into the county office, she said calmly. Blackwell is going to find out you're involved in this. He probably already knows, she said. And I think you should know when he finds out what specifically I've been doing, he may try to use it. He may try to frame you as someone who can't handle his own affairs. A man who needs a mail-order bride to fight his legal battles. She said it clearly, without embarrassment, the way she said difficult things, laying them out where they could be examined, rather than where they had to be navigated around. Nathan looked at her. Let him, Nathan said. She blinked. Let him say whatever he wants to say, Nathan said. It won't change what's on the filing. It won't change what the county surveyor's records show. And any man in this county who wants to argue that a person is less competent because they accept help from someone smart is welcome to try that argument where I can hear it. Amelia was very still. That's not the way most men think about it, she said carefully. I'm aware, Nathan said. Most men are wrong about a lot of things. Something happened in her face that she didn't entirely control. Something that was too fast and too unguarded to be the composed, managed expression she usually maintained. Something that was just Amelia Carter for a second, undefended. Something that looked very much like the expression of a person who has been waiting without knowing they were waiting to hear a particular thing said in a particular way. She looked down at the letter. I'll file the survey request tomorrow, she said, and her voice was slightly different than it had been a moment ago. Slightly less armored. Nathan pretended not to notice. He noticed. The survey records arrived faster than expected. Garrett expedited them, which told Nathan that Garrett had his own reasons to want this particular fight resolved fairly, and they were better than Amelia had hoped. 3 separate surveys of the eastern section over a 9-year period, each one noting the presence of active cattle operations, each one referencing the coal ranch by name. Official, dated, unimpeachable, Amelia filed them as supplementary evidence to the compliance record. Blackwell's lawyer went quiet for 11 days. 11 days, during which the coal ranch ran its ordinary operations, and Amelia managed the accounts, and Nathan rode the fence lines, and they ate supper together every evening in the kitchen, with the lamp between them and something that neither of them named accumulating quietly in the air, the way weather accumulates before a storm. Building charge, building pressure, not yet breaking. On the 12th day something broke, not the legal situation, not yet. But something else, something more immediate, and it started with a sound at the gate before dawn that woke Nathan from the shallow sleep he'd been managing. A particular sound he recognized without being fully conscious, cattle moving wrong. Moving fast and hard and in the wrong direction. He was outside in under a minute. The east pasture fence had been cut, not broken, not storm damage, not animal wear. Cut. 3 sections of the fence line along the eastern boundary, clean cuts that could not have been accidental, and through those cuts, 23 head of cattle had moved out onto the eastern grazing stretch in the dark, which would have been manageable except that someone had also, and this was deliberate. Nathan saw it immediately, felt the calculated cruelty of it, as a physical thing, left the gate to the creek trail standing open. Cattle and water at night, and rough terrain in the dark. He saddled his horse in 4 minutes. Amelia was at the barn door when he came out. She had heard him. She was dressed. She had her horse's lead in her hand. How many, she said. 23 head, east fence is cut. Creek trail gates open, the creek's running fast still from the rain. Do you need me? He did not pause. Yes. They rode out together into the dark. What followed was the hardest hour Nathan had spent on the coal ranch in 4 years. The cattle were scattered, some of them already partway down the creek trail, moving by the sound of water toward a creek that was running higher and faster than it should have been for a herd to navigate safely at night. Nathan rode hard. Amelia rode hard. They split without discussing it, him going ahead to cut off the lead animals, her circling to push the rear back before they reached the fence gap. He lost 2 steers to the creek bank, not to the water. They were able to get them back, but they were down an embankment in the dark. It took time during which the rest of the herd was Amelia's problem alone. He heard her working them, heard her voice carrying across the dark, that sound she made. the low, steady cadence that she used with frightened animals. And he heard the herd responding to it. And he was pulling the second steer up the embankment, thinking, this woman is remarkable. This woman is genuinely remarkable. And then he didn't have time to think anything else, because there was more work to do. They got all 23 head back. They patched the fence with what they had available: temporary repairs, wires and posts from the emergency supplies. Nathan kept in the east barn, enough to hold through the night and into the morning. They rode back to the house as the first gray light was beginning at the eastern edge of the sky. Neither of them spoke until they were inside. Nathan sat down at the kitchen table. He was dirty and cold, and his shoulder hurt from the fence work, and he was furious, with a cold, deep, absolute fury that was entirely different from the hot anger of someone who has been surprised. This was the fury of someone who has been confirmed. Amelia set water to boil. It was deliberate, she said. It was not a question. 3 clean cuts in 3 separate sections of fence line, Nathan said. Yes. Can you prove it was Blackwell? No. She turned around. But you know it was, she said. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then we need to make sure that when we prove it, and we will prove it, we have everything in order, so that the proof means something. She crossed to the table. She sat down across from him. She put her hands flat on the table, and Nathan recognized the gesture because it was the one he had used himself on the day the counter-objection letter arrived, the gesture of a person steadying themselves through their palms, through the solidity of something that will not move. He just made a serious mistake. He moved from legal pressure to physical interference. Those are different things, legally and practically, and he may not realize how differently they'll be treated. If I can't prove it was him, we document the damage, she said. Tonight. Now, before anything changes, we ride back out and document every cut in that fence, and the position of the gate, and every mark that shows this wasn't an accident. We get Garrett out here if we can. We make this part of the official record. Nathan stared at her. You want to ride back out there right now, he said. I want to go back out before daylight changes anything, she said. Yes, he looked at her, covered in mud from the creek bank. Hands red from the cold and the rope work. Something in her eyes that was tired and determined in equal measure and entirely undefeated. All right, he said, all right, let's go document the fence. They went back out, they documented the fence. And sometime in the gray early morning, crouched in the mud on the eastern boundary of the coal ranch, while Amelia measured the cut sections with a piece of cord and called out measurements for Nathan to write down, he thought, I have been fighting alone for 4 years, and I did not know how wrong I was about that until now. Until this, until her. The thought was clear and simple and entirely undefended, and he let it exist for one full moment before he put it somewhere he could find it again later. Then he wrote down the measurement she called out, and they kept working, and the sun came up over the Montana hills and found them there together on his land, and neither of them let go. Garrett came out that same morning. Nathan had sent word before the sun was fully up, riding into Silver Creek himself while Amelia stayed to watch the temporary fence repairs and feed the cattle, and Garrett had come back with him without argument, which told Nathan something important about where the county supervisor's sympathies actually lay when the situation moved past paperwork and into something a person could see with their own eyes. Garrett walked the cut fence line slowly. He crouched at each section. He looked at the cuts without touching them. He stood up and looked at the open gate to the creek trail, and then back at the fence, and then at Nathan, and his expression was the expression of a man who has just seen something confirm a suspicion he has been sitting with for a while. 3 separate cuts, Garrett said. That's what we counted, Nathan said. Amelia documented the measurements before sunup, every section. Garrett looked at Amelia. She handed him the documentation without being asked. 2 pages, written in her clear hand, noting the location of each cut relative to the boundary markers, the approximate dimensions, the condition of the surrounding wire, and the position of the creek trail gate. Garrett read through it carefully. This is thorough, he said, for what was becoming a habitual observation. It needed to be thorough, Amelia said. Garrett handed the pages back. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the fence line again, and then he said, I can't officially connect this to any particular party without evidence of who did it. You know that. I know, Nathan said. What I can do is add this incident to the official record of the boundary dispute as documented physical interference with ranch operations during an active legal filing. He paused. That changes the character of the dispute. It moves it from a civil land matter to something a judge is going to look at differently. Differently how? Amelia asked. A judge looking at a land dispute sees a complicated legal question, Garrett said. A judge looking at a land dispute where someone has been cutting fences in the dark sees a pattern of harassment. Those are not the same case. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but the specific release of a tension he hadn't known he was carrying. The tension of fighting a battle where every weapon available to the other side is legal and documented, and every weapon available to you is just your own stubbornness and the knowledge that you are right. File it, Nathan said. All of it, Garrett nodded. He left with Amelia's documentation in his coat pocket, and Nathan watched him ride back toward town and felt Webb Calloway's words from the week before come back to him without warning. You're a lucky man, Nathan. I'm not sure you know it yet. He was beginning to know it. He was also beginning to be afraid of knowing it. Those two things were going to have to be resolved at some point, and he was running out of ways to postpone the resolution. The next 4 days were quiet. Suspiciously quiet, the kind of quiet that Nathan had learned, over enough hard years, to trust less than noise. Blackwell's lawyer sent no letters. There were no incidents on the fence line. The cattle grazed without interference. The weather held cold and clear, and the ranch ran with the particular deficiencies it had developed over the past weeks, the two of them working in a rhythm that had evolved without either of them engineering it, fitting into each other's patterns the way two people did when they had spent enough time paying attention to each other. Nathan noticed the rhythm. He suspected Amelia noticed it too. Neither of them said anything about it. On the 5th day, Hattie McPherson arrived again. Not with pie this time, with news. She came in the late afternoon and accepted the coffee Amelia put in front of her and said, without preamble, because preamble was never Hattie's way, Richard Blackwell is telling people he's made you an offer. Nathan set down his cup. What offer? He said. He's saying he approached you privately with a fair market purchase offer for the eastern section, and that you refused out of stubbornness, and that the legal situation is the result of you refusing a reasonable resolution. She looked at Nathan steadily. He hasn't made you any offer. No, Nathan said. He hasn't. I know that, Hattie said. But people who don't know it are starting to wonder. Starting to think maybe you're being difficult, that maybe holding out against Blackwell when he's offering fair value is the kind of stubbornness that hurts yourself more than it hurts him. He's building the narrative before the hearing, Amelia said. She hadn't moved from her spot at the stove, but her voice had changed, sharpened, in the way it sharpened when she was working a problem and had found the shape of it. If people believe he made a reasonable offer and Nathan refused, then when the judge rules in the county's favor, however it goes, people will believe Nathan brought it on himself. That's exactly what he's doing, Hattie confirmed. And the trouble is, it's working. I've heard it in the store. I've heard it at the post office. People who should know better are starting to repeat it. Nathan stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to both women for a long moment, and he felt the anger moving through him in slow, controlled waves, not the hot anger of the fence-cutting night, which had been immediate and physical, but the cold anger of a man watching something fundamentally dishonest succeed in the world, which was harder to manage because it had nowhere to go. What do we do about a lie, he said. We tell the truth, Amelia said. Loudly, publicly, and with witnesses, he turned around. She was looking at him steadily. When is the next town meeting? She asked Hattie. 2 weeks, Hattie said. First Wednesday of November. It's the pre-winter planning meeting. Half the county will be there. Nathan speaks at it, Amelia said. He lays out the full situation. The original filing, the compliance record, the fence cutting, all of it. In front of witnesses. On the public record. I've never been a man who Nathan started. I know, Amelia said. I know you haven't, but Blackwell is using your silence. He's writing the story of this dispute in the spaces where your voice isn't. Her eyes were steady on his face. You have to tell your own story. The room was quiet. Hattie looked between the two of them with an expression she had the regret not to put into words. Nathan looked at Amelia for a long moment. He thought about a woman who had stood in the middle of a street front of an entire town and had been rejected publicly and had not let the town write that story for her. Who had picked up her bag and walked toward the hotel and decided entirely on her own terms what that moment meant and what she was going to do next. All right, he said. Hattie put down her coffee cup. Good, she said. I'll make sure the right people know you're speaking. She left. Nathan and Amelia did not immediately speak. The silence was different from the silences of the first weeks. Those silences had been the silences of people maintaining careful distance. This silence was the silence of two people who had been through enough together that they could occupy the same quiet without it being uncomfortable, and who were both aware, right now, that the quiet was comfortable in a way that carried its own particular weight. You didn't have to do that, Nathan said finally. Any of this, the filings, the documentation. I know, she said. You came here under certain. He stopped. Tried again. The situation you arrived into was not the situation you were promised. You have every right to have, Nathan, she said, quiet but definite. He stopped talking. I know what my rights are, she said. I'm not here because of what I'm owed. I'm here because she stopped, and this pause was different from her usual pauses, which were the pauses of thought. This one was the pause of a woman who has reached the edge of something and is not deciding whether to step. Because this place needed someone to fight for it, she said. And I know how to fight for things. And another pause. Shorter. Nathan held her gaze. Why, he said. And he was not asking about the ranch. She knew he was not asking about the ranch. The awareness of what he was actually asking moved across her face like light, moving across water, visible, real, unmistakable to anyone paying attention. And Nathan had not spent weeks learning to pay attention to this woman, only to miss the most important thing she had ever shown him. Because it matters to me, she said, very quietly. What happens here? He let that sit between them. He was aware of the distance across the kitchen table. Aware of it in the way you became aware of a distance, when it was the wrong distance, too much of it, more than made sense, more than either person actually wanted. He did not cross it, not yet. But for the first time he stopped telling himself that it was the right distance to maintain. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow I need to start preparing what to say at the meeting. I'll help you, she said. I know, he said. I'm counting on it. She went to her room. He sat at the table for a long time. He thought about Clara. He did this deliberately, not with the desperate avoiding quality it had had for years, but straight on, the way you looked at a scar when it had healed enough to be looked at. He thought about who Clara was, a warm, laughing woman, who had loved him with an uncomplicated directness that he had taken for granted in the way of a young man who had not yet learned how rare that was. He thought about losing her, about the 2 years after losing her when he had barely been able to function, about the 2 years after that when functioning Shisen had felt like enough. He thought about what it meant that it no longer felt like enough. He thought about Amelia Carter, who was not Clara, who was nobody's shadow, and nobody's replacement, and nobody's second chance in the way that reduced a person to a role who was herself, entirely and specifically herself, a woman forged by loss and difficulty into someone who walked toward hard things instead of away from them, who latched gates twice, who worked accounts with a pencil behind her ear, who talked frightened horses quiet with a sound she had learned from her mother, who had come to Montana with $40 and one bag and absolutely refused, to be sent home. Nathan Cole put his head in his hands. He was in love with her. He had been, he suspected, for some time. He was also still afraid. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and he had been treating them as though only one could be true at once, which was the specific self-deception of a man who had decided that fear was a sufficient reason to withhold love, and who was only now beginning to understand the cost of that decision. He went to bed. He didn't sleep. At some point before dawn, he got up and sat at the kitchen table and wrote down, on a piece of paper, the things he wanted to say at the town meeting. Not the polished version, not the careful strategic version Amelia would help him refine. Just the true version, the raw and unpolished truth of what had been done to his ranch and his land and his livelihood, and underneath it, not intending to. He wrote one more sentence that had nothing to do with land, law, and everything to do with the other thing he had been refusing to say out loud. He read it, he folded the paper, he put it in his coat pocket. He would deal with that part later. The preparation for the town meeting took most of a week. Amelia was methodical about it in a way Nathan found both deeply reassuring and slightly terrifying, because she approached his public remarks the way she approached everything by identifying exactly what needed to be accomplished, stripping out everything that didn't serve that goal, and building something that was clear and specific and unassailable. She asked him questions and listened to his answers without interrupting and made notes in the margins of her paper and then handed the notes back to him in a form that was, somehow, still his voice. Still the way he would have said it if he'd had the time and the clarity to find the right words on his own. "You don't soften it enough," she said, reading his third draft on a Thursday evening. "It's the truth," Nathan said. "The truth can be stated in a way that makes people defensive before you've made your case," she said. "You want them to understand what Blackwell is doing. You don't want them to feel accused of participating in it." She made a mark on the page. "Here, instead of people have been repeating lies, you say the record does not support the accounts that have been circulating. Same meaning. Nobody in that room feels like you're calling them a fool." Nathan looked at the change. "You're good at this," he said. "My father used to say." She stopped. He waited. "He used to say the strongest argument is the one the other person helps you make," she said. "Give people room to come to the right conclusion themselves. Don't back them into it. Was he right?" She was quiet for a moment. "About that," she said. "Yes, he was right about that." They worked through 2 more drafts before Nathan was satisfied. On the Wednesday evening of the town meeting, half of Silver Creek filled the meeting hall, which was more than usual, and which told Nathan that word had spread, either Hattie's careful work or Blackwell's rumor campaign, or both had succeeded in making this meeting a thing people wanted to witness. He recognized faces from 3 different ranching operations, people he hadn't seen in months, people who had traveled in specifically for this. He recognized the banker, Horton, who had enough stake in the county's land situation to have opinions about it. He recognized Blackwell in the back of the room, standing with 2 other men Nathan didn't know and who had the particular look of people who had come to observe professionally. Amelia was not in the meeting hall. She had said she would stay at the ranch. She had said it was better that she not be visibly present, that this was Nathan's case to make, and his voice, that needed to be in that room, not hers, and that her presence might give Blackwell an angle to make the argument about her rather than about the land. She was right. Nathan knew she was right. He also found, standing at the front of that meeting hall, with the faces of the county looking at him, that he had not expected how much her absence would matter. How much he had been, without registering it fully until this moment, relying on the knowledge of her steady attention as a thing to brace against. He stood up straight. He had done hard things alone before. He unfolded his papers. He spoke. He was not a natural orator. He was not a man who performed for crowds or traded an emotion or the particular kind of fire that moved people to their feet. What he was, and what he delivered that night with absolute precision, was a clear-eyed account of what had happened. The original lease, the compliance requirement he had not known about, the counterfiling and the documentation, the fence cuts on the record, the rumored offer that had never been made, the pattern of a man using legal mechanisms as instruments of harassment against a smaller operation, systematically, with patience and resources, over the course of months. He laid it out in sequence. He did not accuse the room. He gave them room to draw their own conclusions. And then he said the sentence that Amelia hadn't written, that wasn't in any of the drafts, that he hadn't planned to say, and that came out of him with a directness that surprised even himself. "I am not asking you to take my side. I am asking you to look at the evidence and decide whether this is how things ought to go in this county. Whether the man with the most lawyers should always be the man with the most land." The silence that followed was substantial. And then Webb Calloway said, from his seat near the middle of the room, "No, it's not." 3 other men agreed before the meeting was half over. Blackwell left early. His lawyer stayed. On the ride home, Nathan felt something he hadn't expected, not triumph, exactly, but something that had the texture of it. Something cleaner than the grinding, exhausting anxiety of the past weeks. Something like momentum. He came through the gate latching it twice, the habit now fully automatic, the way things became automatic when they were done right often enough, and found the house lit and Amelia at the kitchen table, not working for once. Just sitting with her hands around a cup of coffee, and her face turned toward the door as he came in. She read him the way she always read him, before he'd said a word. "It went well," she said. "It went well," he confirmed. She let out a breath that she had clearly been holding. He sat down across from her. He looked at the table, at his own hands, at the lamp burning between them in the way it had been burning every evening for 5 weeks in this kitchen, and how that ordinary specific image had become, without his planning it or choosing it, something he associated with safety. "With being home, Amelia," he said. She looked at him. "I need to say something to you," he said. Her expression shifted. Careful. Not closed. She never quite closed off completely. He had learned that she always left something accessible, but careful. The way a person was careful with a thing they were afraid of breaking. "All right," she said. He reached into his coat pocket. He took out the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and set it on the table and pushed it across to her. She looked at it. She read the one extra sentence at the bottom. Nathan watched her face. It was quiet in the kitchen. The lamp burned. The wind pressed against the walls. She read it a second time. She looked up. "Nathan," she said, and her voice was different, stripped the careful composure, not completely, but enough that he could hear something underneath it that he recognized, because it was the same thing he had been carrying around in his own chest for weeks and refusing to examine. "I know the circumstances are complicated," he said. "I know I made a poor start. I know standing in the street and saying what I said was one of the worst things I have ever done to another person, and I am not asking you to." "What does this mean?" she said quietly, holding the paper. He looked at her directly. "It means I don't want you to leave when the 3 months are up," he said. "It means I want." He stopped. He was not, had never been, a man who found these words easily, and the difficulty of finding them was part of why he had written the sentence down in the first place, so that at least part of it existed in a form she could hold. "It means I want you to stay, not because of the ranch. Not because of the accounts or the cattle or the legal filings." He paused. "Because of you. Because of who you are. Because I have spent 5 weeks watching the most capable and determined person I have ever met fight for something that wasn't even hers to fight for, and I would like." His voice was steady. His hands on the table were steady, but there was something in his chest that was anything but. "I would like the chance to fight for something that matters to you, for once. If you'll let me." Amelia Carter set the paper down. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Nathan Cole, this man who had been broken by love and built himself back up from the ruins and spent 4 years perfecting the art of needing nothing, who had said in front of her whole town, on the day she arrived, that he would not marry her, who had stood in a meeting hall that night and told an entire county to look at the evidence and decide for themselves whether things were being done right, and she saw him for exactly what he was. A man who was afraid and was telling her the truth anyway. A man who was offering her the thing that had cost him the most to offer. "You wrote it in pencil," she said. He blinked. "The sentence," she said. "You wrote it in pencil." He looked at the paper. He hadn't thought about it. "I could have been wrong about what I was feeling," he said carefully. "I wanted to be able to take it back if I was wrong." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Are you wrong?" she said. "No," he said. She reached across the table. She picked up the pencil that was lying beside her notes. She looked at him one more time, and the thing in her face was clear now, undefended, certain, and not the careful, measured certainty she brought to accounts and legal filings, but a different kind entirely. The kind that came from the deepest and most honest part of a person. She put a line through the pencil sentence on the paper. and beside it, in her own clear hand, she wrote something. She turned the paper around and slid it back to him. He read what she had written. He looked up. She was looking at him with the first completely open expression he had seen on her face since the day she stepped off the stagecoach, not guarded, not composed, not carefully managed, just Amelia, simply and entirely Amelia. Watching him across the kitchen table, in the lamplight, with everything she felt entirely visible. "The 3 months are up in 9 days, she said. "No," he said. "I wasn't going to leave," she said quietly. "I should probably tell you that. I hadn't decided yet to stay forever, but I wasn't going to leave." Something came loose in Nathan Cole's chest, something that had been held rigid for 4 years, braced against the exact possibility that was now sitting across the kitchen table from him, looking at him with those steady dark eyes and a pencil in her hand. "I know," he said. He did know. He had known, he thought, for longer than he had been willing to admit. "I want," she stopped. She was choosing her words the way she chose everything carefully, but not cautiously. There was a difference, and she knew it. "I want something real," she said. "Not an arrangement, not a practical solution. I've managed my way through enough practical solutions. I want something?" "Yes," she said. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. Not quickly. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who has thought about this and knows what it means and is not pretending otherwise. Her hand turned under his. She held on. Outside, the Montana night was cold and vast and indifferent, the way Montana was always cold and vast and indifferent, not caring about the small and human dramas that played out against its enormous backdrop. But inside the kitchen of the Cole Ranch, in the lamplight, 2 people who had been broken in different ways by different griefs were sitting at a table together, holding on, and it was not the beginning of something easy. It was the beginning of something true. And for the first time in 4 years, Nathan Cole did not look at a beginning and feel afraid. He felt very quietly like he was home 9 days. That was what Amelia had said. The 3 months were up in 9 days. And she had told him she wasn't going to leave, and he had told her he didn't want her to, and they had sat at that kitchen table with his hand over hers until the lamp burned low, and neither of them had needed to say anything more, because some things, when they are finally said correctly, don't require addition. But 9 days was also enough time for Richard Blackwell to make one final move. Nathan found out about it on a Thursday, 4 days after the town meeting, when he rode into Silver Creek for the weekly supply run and found Webb Calloway waiting at the feed store. With the expression of a man who has information, he doesn't want to be the one to deliver. "Just tell me," Nathan said. Webb told him. Blackwell had filed a motion in the territorial court in Billings. Not with the county office, not with Garrett, but directly with the territorial court, bypassing the local process entirely, going above it, using the one resource he had that Nathan couldn't match at the county level, which was a lawyer who practiced at the territorial level and connections in Billings that Garrett's goodwill could not reach. The motion challenged the validity of the entire compliance, filing on the grounds that the original retroactive provision did not apply to lease conditions established prior to 1878, which was a technical argument so specific and so obscure that it could only have been found by someone who had been looking for it very deliberately for a very long time. "How long do you have to respond?" Webb asked. "I don't know," Nathan said. "I need to see the filing." He got the filing from the courier at the post office. He read it on his horse, which was not the most practical approach, but was the approach of a man who could not wait 20 more minutes to know how bad the news was. It was bad. Not unsurvivable, he thought. The territorial argument was narrow and technical, and almost certainly crafted specifically to be difficult to respond to without territorial-level legal representation, which Nathan did not have and could not afford. He rode home faster than he had ridden anything in recent memory. Amelia heard his horse come in hard. She was at the door before he dismounted. He handed her the filing without a word. She read it on the porch, standing, not sitting, which told him she had understood, within the first paragraph, that it was not the kind of document you read comfortably. He watched her face move through the paragraphs with the same focused attention it always had, but faster this time. her eyes moving quickly, and he saw the moment she hit the specific technical argument, because her jaw tightened in a way that was small and barely visible, and was the closest thing to visible distress he had ever seen from her in a legal context. She finished. She lowered the papers. She was quiet for a long moment. He went to Billings, she said. Yes, he was never trying to win at the county level, she said. And there was something in her voice, not quite anger, something colder and more considered than anger. He was using the county filings to build a record, to establish a paper trail, so that when he went to the territorial court, he could say he had made every reasonable effort at the local level and been obstructed. Can he win this? Nathan said. She was quiet again. This quiet was different from her others. It was the quiet of genuine calculation, of a person running through every possibility they can think of and examining each one for weakness. He had learned to respect this quiet. He had also learned to be afraid of it when it lasted too long. The pre-1878 provision argument, she said finally. I need to look at the original territorial statute. The argument only holds if the retroactive cure period was added to the regulations after 1878. If it was part of the original regulation, even as an amendment before 1878, his entire basis falls apart. How do we find the original statute? She looked at him. The territorial archives, she said, in Billings. He looked back at her. Billings, he said. That's 3 days' ride. Yes, he calculated. The motion was filed Monday. Territorial court standard response window is 21 days. Which means 17 days, she said. To get to Billings, find the original statute, draft a response, and file it. 17 days. 3 days there, 3 days back, which left 11 days to find the specific document in a territorial archive that neither of them had ever navigated. In a city where Blackwell had lawyers who knew the system, and they had nothing but Amelia's legal knowledge and whatever time was left. I'll go, Nathan said. We'll go, Amelianus. Nathan, her voice was quiet but absolute. I know what I'm looking for. You don't. And if we find it, someone needs to understand it well enough to build the response. That she held his gaze. We'll go. He wanted to argue. He looked at her face. He did not argue. We leave at first light, he said. I'll start packing tonight, she said. They told Hattie McPherson, who agreed without being asked to keep an eye on the ranch, and had the specific manner of a woman who had been hoping for an opportunity to be useful and was glad to have found one. Webb Calloway said he would check the cattle. Emmett McPherson, despite his 81 years, said he would ride the east fence line every other day, and Nathan believed him. They rode out before the sun was fully up. Side by side, the same way they had ridden through the dark to save the cattle from the creek, the same way they had worked the fence line in the early morning, documenting Blackwell's sabotage side by side had become, over 5 weeks, the natural formation, the one they returned to, without thinking about it. The ride to Billings was long and cold, and Nathan had made it alone before, several times, and had never particularly minded the solitude because solitude was what he knew. Riding it with Amelia was a completely different experience in a way that he found difficult to account for precisely. She was not a woman who filled silence with noise. She was comfortable with quiet the way he was, which should have made the ride essentially the same as riding alone, and yet it was nothing like riding alone. The difference was not sound, it was presence. The specific weight of another person's attention, sharing the same space as your own, the knowledge that if you said something, it would land somewhere real, the way that changed the quality of everything, even the silence. They talked some. About the case, about the archive and what they were looking for, and the specific language that would invalidate Blackwell's technical argument. About the cattle and the eastern fence, and the winter coming, and what the ranch would need to get through it in good condition, was practical things, the language they were most comfortable with. And then, on the second day, riding through a stretch of high country where the cold was clean and absolute, and the land rolled out in all directions further than a person could take in. Amelia said something that wasn't practical at all. Tell me about Clara, she said. Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. You don't have to, she said quickly. I'm not trying to compare anything. I just want to know who she was, because she mattered to you, and I want to know the things that matter to you." He was quiet for a long time, then he told her. He told her about Clara in the way he had not talked about Clara to anyone in 4 years, not the version that people in Silver Creek knew, which was the broad and tragic outline of a young wife lost too soon, but the actual person. The woman who had laughed too loudly in church and felt terrible about it, and then laughed again. Who had kept 3 cats that Nathan was categorically not fond of, and who had somehow arranged things so that he fed those cats every morning without ever being directly asked. Who had a habit of making decisions and telling him about them afterward, that had driven him to distraction, and that he would give almost anything to be driven to again. He talked for a long time. Amelia listened without interrupting, without performing sympathy. She just listened. The way she did everything completely, giving the thing her full attention, letting it be what it was. When he finished, she said, "She sounds like someone who lived very fully." "She did," Nathan said. "Is that part of what made it so hard?" she said carefully. "That there was so much of her." He thought about that. "Yes," he said. "I think that's exactly it. I think I decided afterward that the more fully a person lived, the more space they left when they were gone. And that the space wasn't survivable a second time." "And now?" she said. He looked at her. She was looking forward, not at him, giving him room to answer honestly without the pressure of being watched. "Now," he said slowly, "I think I was wrong about the space. I think the space is always there. I don't think you fill it. I think you—" he tried to find the right word. "I think you learn to live in a house that has that room in it. And that living in it doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the grief, and also carrying the rest of it." At the same time, Amelia was quiet. "My mother," she said after a moment. "I've been carrying her for 12 years. I still hear her voice when I'm trying to quiet something frightened." A pause. "I don't think that's a wound anymore. I think it's just part of how I'm built now." "Yes," Nathan said. "That's exactly it." They rode on. The cold pressed around them, and the land spread wide, and they were 2 people carrying their losses and riding towards something they both needed to find, and Nathan Cole thought, with a clarity that had nothing academic about it, that this was what it meant to know someone. Not the absence of grief or history or difficulty. The presence of another person who had their own grief and history and difficulty, and who made room for yours without being diminished by it. He reached across the space between their horses. He put his hand briefly on hers where it rested on the saddle. She turned her palm up. He held her hand for one moment in the cold mountain air, and then they both had to manage their horses on a narrow stretch of trail. And the moment ended, but it had happened, and they both knew it had happened. And neither of them needed to make it into more than it was because it was already exactly enough. They reached Billings on the evening of the 3rd day. The territorial archives were housed in a building that smelled of old paper and cold stone, and the specific mustiness of records that had been accumulating since before the territory was a territory. And the archivist, a thin, precise man named Coldwell, who had the manner of someone who loved order more than he loved people, which Nathan suspected made him excellent at his job, looked at Amelia's written request for the original land regulation statute, and then looked at Amelia, and then looked at the request again. "The 1,874 land regulations," he said. "And any amendments prior to 1,880, Amelia said. Specifically the retroactive cure provision in Section 4 of the Leaseholder Compliance Code." Coldwell looked at her for a moment longer. "Most people who come in here asking for pre-territorial statutes," he said, "don't know what section they're looking for." "I know what I'm looking for," Amelia said. He brought them the documents. They worked at a table in the archive for 3 hours. Nathan read and Amelia directed, telling him what to look for, and it was painstaking and eye-straining in the dim light of an archive that did not accommodate urgency particularly well. They went through the original 1,874 regulation, which was 62 pages. They went through the 1,875 amendment record, the 1,876 revision summary, and on page 14 of the 1,876 revision summary, Amelia put her finger on a paragraph and said, quietly and with absolute precision, there. Nathan read the paragraph. The retroactive cure provision, the specific provision Blackwell's lawyer had argued, was added after 1,878 and therefore did not apply to pre-1,878 lease conditions had been included in the 1,876 revision. 2 years before the date Blackwell's motion had claimed. 2 years that made his entire technical argument not merely incorrect but provably, documentably, archivally incorrect. He was wrong, Nathan said. His lawyer made an error, Amelia said. Or chose to make one, hoping nobody would look closely enough at the original documents to catch it. Can we copy this? We need a certified copy, she said. Coldwell can certify it. It's a public document, he has to. Coldwell certified it. He also, with the quiet efficiency of a man who respected thorough legal work regardless of who it came from, noted the specific discrepancy between the date cited in the Blackwell motion and the date on the document, and added that note to the certification in a way that would be visible to any judge who read it. Nathan paid for the certification. He folded the document. He put it in his coat. He turned to Amelia. She was looking at him with the expression she had worn in the county office when the filing was stamped, when the compliance record went through, when Garrett walked the fence line and understood what he was seeing, the expression of someone who has fought for a thing and found the ground. But it was different this time. There was something else in it too. Something that had been building for 5 weeks and had found its form on the second day of the ride when he held her hand in the cold Montana air. We need to draft the response, she said. Tonight, he agreed. And file it before we leave Billings. Tomorrow morning. She nodded. Neither of them moved for a moment. Amelia, he said. She looked at him. When we get back, he said. When this is finished. I want to talk about what comes next. Not the ranch. Not the legal situation. The other thing. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I want to do it properly, he said. I want to, he stopped. He was better at it than he had been, but the words still didn't come easily, and he suspected they never entirely would, and he suspected she had already figured that out, and was not holding it against him. I want to ask you something properly, when there isn't a crisis to manage. Is that a promise? She said, and there was something in her voice, something quiet and warm and very slightly unsteady, which was the most unsteady he had ever heard her, and which did something to his chest that he had stopped trying to name. Yes, he said. Then I'll hold you to it, she said. They drafted the response that night at a table in a Billings hotel, working by lamplight the way they had worked at the kitchen table of the coal ranch so many evenings, Amelia's pencil moving and Nathan reading aloud and both of them going back and forth over the language until it was exactly right. The response was 8 pages. It was precise. It cited the 1,876 revision with the page and paragraph number, and included the certified archival copy as Exhibit A. And it dismantled Blackwell's territorial motion with the specific and surgical efficiency of someone who had found the exact crack in the foundation and pressed on it correctly. When they finished, Nathan read through the completed document one final time. This is going to work, he said. Yes, Amelia said. I think it is. You're certain? She looked at him. I'm certain the argument is correct. Courts and people are never entirely certain. But the argument is correct. He nodded. She started gathering the papers. Amelia, he said. She looked up. He reached across the table. He took the papers from her hands and set them aside. He held both her hands in both of his across the table, in a hotel room in Billings, Montana, and he said, I know I said when we get back. But I don't want to wait until there isn't a crisis. Because there's always going to be a crisis. There's always going to be a fence that needs mending, or an account that needs balancing, or a legal motion that needs answering. And if I wait for a time when none of that is happening, I'll be waiting my whole life. She was very still. I am not a man who says things easily, he said. You know that. You've known that since about the 4th day. And I am not, he paused. I am not going to be a man who stops being afraid. I think the fear is part of how I'm built now, the same way your mother's voice is part of how you're built. But I have learned, these past weeks, that afraid and willing are not opposites. That a man can be both at the same time, and I am both, right now, and I would rather tell you that honestly than say nothing and call it caution. Amelia's hands tightened on his. What are you saying, she said. Her voice was steady but barely. I'm saying I love you, Nathan Cole said. I'm saying it out loud, in a hotel room in Billings, with the legal response to our land dispute, sitting on the table beside us, because that is the situation I am in, and I am done waiting for a better one. He held her gaze. I'm saying I want you to marry me, not because the ranch needs a partner, not because the accounts need managing, because I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I think about is whether you've slept, and the last thing I think about at night is whether you're warm enough, and somewhere in between I think about you constantly, and have for weeks, and I am done pretending otherwise. Amelia looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were bright. She was not a woman who cried easily. He had never seen her cry, not once, not through all of it, but something was very close to the surface now, something real and undefended and entirely her. You wrote that sentence in pencil, she said. Her voice was low. Because you wanted to be able to take it back. Yes, he said. I wrote mine in ink, she said. He remembered. He had read what she wrote, and he had not forgotten a word of it. I know, he said. I knew then, she said. When I wrote it, I knew. I just exhaled. I wanted you to know first. I wanted it to come from you first. Because you had so much further to travel to get there, and I didn't want to pull you somewhere you hadn't chosen to go. I chose it, he said. I know you did, she said. She turned her hands over in his, and held on the way she had held on at the kitchen table, with the same quiet certainty, the same unhesitating grip of someone who has decided and is not looking back. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. Yes, she said again, and this time she was smiling a real smile, unguarded and unreserved, the first time he had seen her smile that way, completely, without the careful management she usually kept around her expressions. And it was one of the most specific and irreplaceable things Nathan Cole had ever seen in his life. He did not say anything else. He brought her hands up and pressed them briefly against his face and closed his eyes, and it was not a gesture he had planned or chosen. It was just what happened when everything he had been holding for 4 years finally let go, and the holding had been so long that the release was almost physical, like something unknotting deep in the chest, where he had kept it locked down and safe, and entirely without hope of resolution. She let him. She didn't say anything. She just let him hold her hands against his face, in the lamplight in that hotel room in Billings, and after a moment she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, and they stayed like that for a long time. Two people who had come from very different places by very different roads, and had arrived, finally, at exactly the same one. They filed the response the next morning. The clerk at the territorial court took one look at the certified archival exhibit and called a second clerk over to look at it, and the two of them conferred in low voices for a moment, and then the first clerk stamped the filing and said, with the careful neutrality of a man who had professional reasons not to make predictions, "This will be reviewed within 10 days. Nathan thanked him. They rode home. The response period took 8 days. 8 days during which the Cole Ranch ran its operations and Amelia managed the accounts, and Nathan rode the fence lines. And they ate supper together every evening in the kitchen, and slept under the same roof without yet being married, which Hattie McPherson had opinions about and expressed those opinions to Nathan with characteristic directness. And Nathan told her the situation would be resolved shortly, and Hattie said it had better be. And Nathan did not tell her that the situation had already been resolved in a hotel room in Billings by lamplight, because some things were not Hattie's to know first. On the 8th day, Garrett rode out to the ranch. He came in the late afternoon, and Amelia put coffee on, and Garrett sat at the kitchen table, and Nathan stood against the counter, and both of them waited. Territorial court ruled, Garrett said, this morning. Nathan looked at him. Garrett looked back. The Blackwell motion was denied, he said, on the grounds that the pre-1878 date cited in the filing was factually incorrect, and that the retroactive cure provision of the 1866 revision applies in full to the Cole Ranch compliance record. He paused. The ruling also notes, in language I haven't seen a territorial court use in some time, that the pattern of filings in this case suggests an intent to harass rather than resolve a legitimate dispute, and that further motions of a similar nature will be subject to court costs assessed to the filing party. Nathan was very still for a moment. Then he let out a breath that he had been holding, he realized, for weeks. Possibly for months, possibly in some form for 4 years. The eastern section, he said, is yours, Garrett said. Clean, no pending challenges, no outstanding motions. He picked up his coffee. The county will send formal documentation next week. But it's done, Nathan, it was done. Garrett finished his coffee. He shook Nathan's hand. He paused at the door and looked at Amelia with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it, something that acknowledged more than he was going to put into words. Good work, he said to her. Thank you, she said. He left. The kitchen was quiet. Nathan looked at Amelia. She looked at him. And then something happened that Nathan had never expected, and that he would remember for the rest of his life. Amelia Carter sat down in the kitchen chair and put her face in her hands, and made a sound that was not crying exactly, but was close enough to it that it was clearly the release of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, the specific sound of a person who has been strong through an entire crisis and is now, in the safety of its resolution, allowing themselves to feel the weight of everything they carried through it. Nathan crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. He crouched beside her chair. He put his hand on her back. It's done, he said quietly. It's over. She nodded without taking her face from her hands. I know, she said, muffled. I know, you don't have to explain it, he said. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were bright, but she had not cried quite. She looked at him, very close, and the expression on her face was one of those completely open ones that she had started showing him, the ones without the careful management. And he had learned to understand those expressions as the highest form of trust she offered. My father lost his, she said. We did everything right, and we still lost. I know, Nathan said. I needed this to go differently, she said, and her voice was low and honest and a little raw. Not just for you. For him, Nathan said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Is that strange? No, he said. It's not strange at all. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it and stood. They were standing very close in the kitchen, the afternoon light coming in and the ranch quiet around them, and the legal fight finished, and the future, the actual future, the one that had seemed impossible for so long, sitting right there in front of them, available, real, asking only to be chosen. I need to go into Silver Creek on Saturday, Nathan said. For supplies, she said. For a ring, he said. She stared at him. I told you I wanted to do it properly, he said. That's part of doing it properly. She opened her mouth and closed it again. He smiled the particular slow, rare smile that she'd seen exactly 4 times in 5 weeks, and which she was already keeping careful count of. Is that all right? Yes, she said. Yes. That's all right. They were married 3 weeks later, in the Silver Creek church, on a Saturday morning when the November cold was bright and absolute, and the mountains were visible from every window. Hattie McPherson was there, in the front pew, wearing her best dress and crying without any apparent embarrassment about it. Webb Calloway was there. Emmett McPherson was there, having ridden 2 miles in the cold at 81 years old because he said he had earned the right to see how this particular story ended. Garrett was there. Half the county was there, the same people who had watched a woman step off a stagecoach in October and watched a man tell her in the street that he would not marry her, and who had watched what happened next with an attention that had never entirely gone away. The minister said the words. Nathan said his. Amelia said hers clearly, without hesitation, in the steady voice that Nathan had come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of it in its most controlled and genuine form. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for 1 moment. Then she looked at him, and the expression on her face was the one she had shown him in the Billings hotel room, completely open, unreserved, the specific expression of a woman who has chosen something fully and is not looking back. And Nathan Cole looked at his wife in the cold morning light of a November Saturday in Silver Creek, Montana, and felt the thing he had been most afraid of feeling for 4 years. He felt happy. Not the careful, managed contentment of a man who has built a life from the ruins of grief and learned to be satisfied with it. Not the fragile, provisional gladness of someone who keeps waiting for the other thing to fall. Something deeper and simpler than either of those, the particular happiness of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be, doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, with exactly the right person standing beside them. He was home. In the years that followed, the Cole Ranch became something different from what it had been. Not unrecognizable, it was still the same land, still the same cattle operation, still the same cold Montana winters and blazing summers, and the endless work of keeping a working ranch alive. But it was a ranch with accounts in impeccable order, and fences that were checked twice, and cattle that were handled by someone who knew the sound that settled frightened animals, and a kitchen that smelled like food made by someone who understood what feeding people actually meant. It was a ranch that felt undeniably and completely like a home. Amelia Cole became one of the most respected women in Silver Creek County not because of the legal fight, though that was known and had its own particular legend in the way that things in small counties acquire legend, but because of the daily accumulation of who she was. The way she helped Hattie's neighbor contest a bad land survey and win. The way she taught the banker's daughter to keep accounts. The way she showed up when things went wrong for people she barely knew, because she had learned early that showing up was the most important thing a person could do, and she had never stopped believing it. Nathan Cole became something he had stopped believing he could become in the 4 years after Clara, a man who lived fully in his own life, who laughed with his wife in the kitchen on ordinary evenings, who taught her things about the land, and learned from her things about the people on it, and who understood, finally, that the space left by grief was not a wound to be protected but a room that could, with time and honesty and the right person, be lived in again. People in Silver Creek told the story for years. They told it the way communities tell the stories that matter to them, not perfectly, not entirely accurately, with the particular embellishment that comes from a story being passed through many mouths, no, but with the essential truth intact. The truth that a woman arrived as a stranger and became the person a man had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. The truth that two people broken by different griefs found in each other's, not a cure for grief, but something better, the company of someone who understood what it meant to carry it, and who made the carrying lighter by virtue of simply being there. The truth that love did not always arrive the way you expected it, that it came sometimes on a stagecoach, in a worn traveling dress, with one bag and $40, and the kind of determination that latches gates twice and reads every document completely, and talks frightened horses quiet with a sound learned from someone long gone. That the man who stood in the street and said he would not marry you might become the man who rode 3 days to Billings and held your hands against his face and let 4 years of held breath go all at once. That the love you never dreamed of finding was sometimes standing right in front of you, looking at you with steady dark eyes, waiting for you to stop being afraid long enough to let it in. Nathan Cole had been afraid. He had let it in anyway. And every morning for the rest of his life, he woke up in a house that was warm and full and entirely, completely, irrevocably home.